welcome to the Dive Into Reiki podcast. And today we have a very exciting, intriguing, and perhaps for some people, shocking episode of the podcast. We're going to be talking with Jojan Jonker, who's a Reiki Master, independent scholar in the field of religious studies, an author. And he graduated in computer science, but he actually has been practicing Reiki since 1994. In 98, he became a Reiki Master. And then he developed a special interest for new spiritualities and healing. In 2010, he graduated in Interreligious Spirituality from Radboud University. And I'm not going to say the last word, read it in the notes because I cannot pronounce it. And he did an external PhD and obtained his doctorate in 2016. Jojan and I talked last time, right? Jojan, it was a year and a half ago, something like that.
Yes, something like that, I think,
And
even 2 years ago.
I'm very grateful because I want to say before we start with all of this, Jojan is a very open-minded, but he's also very grounded historian, very well-trained person. The theme we're bringing today for some people has been a little bit triggering. So I invite everybody to have an open mind. We're not saying this is right or wrong, this is true or not. We're really bringing a mind of inquiry to new historical information that has brought up about Reiki history and having a great discussion about it, right, Jojan?
Good.
Perfect. So I'm gonna set up a little bit and then I'm gonna Jojan take over because he's the one who really knows about this. For those of you who may not be aware, a little over a year ago, around a year ago, there was this new book that came out from a woman called Elizabeth, and I don't have her last name because I'm very bad with names. But really, the theory is she found that, and you have it, Jojan is showing the video, and I'll put a picture of that and the notes on the podcast. And is finding actually, she found this person called Tokio Yokoi, who it was a Christian reverend in Japan at the same time, probably of Mikao Usui. And that person actually fits that profile of the Reiki creator and Takata stories very well. So now we're discussing, was Mikao Usui really the creator of Reiki? Was he a real person? Was he perhaps Tokio Yokoi pseudonym? So again, there is a little bit of intriguing and discovering, was Mikao Usui a real person or not? Or was Tokio Yokoi the real creator of Reiki? And Jojan, you're gonna say it much better, but if you can start a little bit at the beginning, the first time you heard this.
Okay, thank you, Nathalie, for this conversation, and thank you for the invitation, of course. And yes, I heard about this story, I think, 2 years ago. Um, that was when Elizabeth reached out to me with her story that she had a very special dream already in 1993, so it's not that recent. That she saw in her dream a Japanese face saying to her, I am, this is how I look like. I am the man you were looking for. I am Usui. And so that was intriguing. And why did she had this dream in the first place? And for that, we have to go back a little bit in the history of Reiki and not too far away. And as you probably all know, that Mrs. Takata died in 1980. And at that time, people of Reiki really started to spread through the 22 Takata masters. And Takata always had told a certain narrative with specific details about Usui. And it was that he would have been an ordained minister in Protestantism, that he would be a teacher on Doshisha, that he would be head of Doshisha, that he traveled to Europe, that he had studied in America, and so on and so forth. However, so that was the situation back in 1980, 1990. And then we have in 1991, we have William Rand, an Australian Reiki master, and he started to write a letter to Doshisha. From, have you heard about a Mikao Usui? Was there a principal Mikao Usui or a teacher Usui? No, no, we didn't have a principal Mikao Usui, and we didn't have a teacher, and we didn't even have a student Mikao Usui. We never heard of him. So from that moment onwards, the story of Takata was dismissed as fantasy. And later on, people like Justin Stein said, well, she, she must have made this story up. in order to make it more digestible for the American audience, because it now had a Christian sauce, so to speak, a Christian flavor, and it would be more digestible for Christian people in the United States. That was more or less the status quo. Um, with hindsight, with hindsight, it's always easy to point where things could have been done better. Is that what William Rand forgot to ask to Doshisha? The same question the other way around. He could have asked also, okay, you don't know the name Mikao Usui, but did you have a principal that was also a teacher, that was an ordained reverend, and one who resigned after a dispute with his students? Then they would already have said, oh, yes, that is Tokio Yokoi. But he didn't. He forgot. So this is 1991, and Elizabeth, who just had just become a Reiki master, thought, well, this is not the way to ask things to Japanese. You have to go there. You cannot write a letter. So in 1993, she made an appointment with Doshisha. She went. She lives in Australia, so she went from Australia to Japan. Went to Doshisha and asked if she could see the archive. And she saw the presidents, and indeed, she didn't see a face of Mikao Usui, neither a picture nor his name. And so she went back and she thought, but she still didn't understand it, and she still thought, I'm missing something. They are not showing everything. And then in 1993, she had a dream. And this is where this Japanese person appeared in her dream saying, I am the man you are looking for. This is how I look like. I am Usui. She was overwhelmed and she said, I have to go back. So she went back to Doshisha and asked again to see the archives. And she saw the same things as the first time. And she said, no, 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 there must be more. There must be a bigger archive. Yeah, well, no, this, blah, 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 blah. I want to see it. So she was taken to another room, and there she could browse through all kinds of paper, and suddenly she saw the picture of the man of her dream, and she was overwhelmed. And she asked to these people, "Who is this?" "Oh, that is the third president of Doshisha." "What is his name?" "Tokio Yokoi." "Was he a reverend?" "Yes, he was a reverend." "Tell me something about him." "Yeah, well, he was also a teacher of a boys' class, and at some point, um, not necessarily a boys' class. He was a teacher, and at some point he had a dispute with his students, and then he left the shisha. Oh, and did he also study in the United States? Yes, he also studied in the United States. Oh, and did he also travel to Europe? Yes, he has also been to Europe. Oh, so basically, what he heard was the story of Takata, but not with the name Mikao Usui. So in 1993, she had the name Mikao Usui that didn't match with the narrative of Takata, and she had now the narrative of a Tokio Yokoi that didn't match the name Mikao Usui. And so she was puzzled. How is this possible? And she started to do her own investigation and her own research. And at that time, don't mind you, there was no internet. So you had to go to libraries, you had to buy books, you had to write letters to organizations or to uh, uh, what to the government from Japan, from the United States, from Hawaii, and then you have to wait 3 months and before you got an answer, if you got an answer. So it took time and time and time, and that is why it took so long for her to create this book, so to speak. And she became more and more convinced that this was the man Takata was talking about. So that was for her no longer an issue. But she couldn't solve the puzzle. How where we have two pieces of the puzzle. One is Tokio Yokoi, and the other is Mikao Usui as we know him. How do they fit together? And in the end, she came to the conclusion that most likely Tokio Yokoi developed Reiki and spread it under a pseudonym, Usui. And that is why he presented himself in her dream I am Usui. He didn't say I am Mikao Usui. I am Usui. And so that was a theory that he um, used a pseudonym for reasons that I will come back on that because this is how it all started. And yeah, and then 2 years ago I urged at Elizabeth that she should bring out this information. I said you cannot hold this for yourself, and but also, but based on what she told, I thought, hey, wait a minute, there are so many dots, and it could have been possible that somebody else also would have connected those dots, like me or another scholar. And in that case, her work would have been lost because he would not have got the credits by discovering this Tokio Yokoi, the man that belonged to the narrative. So she brought out her book, but that was her life works. It contains a lot of stories of how she went to India and how she did transcendental meditation, how she met Mother Teresa. Interesting to read, but distracting for many readers, perhaps. And but it is loaded with details. It is in itself interesting to read, absolutely. But nevertheless, um, so when she brought out her book, I thought, well, okay, I do accept that this man is the person Miss Takata spoke about. That was clear for me, and I thought that for me as a scholar, I thought, now it's time. If can I prove that he acquired the necessary knowledge to develop Reiki, and its other narratives, because 98 he went only at the kata, that was it. The Yikiden has a narrative, Gendai has a narrative, the memorial stone says something about the person Mikao Usui. Does it all belong to the person Mikao Usui, or are all these narratives can all these narratives be connected to the person Tokio Yokoi? And over time, I found that what the other narratives say and what the kata not necessarily had said also belongs to Tokio Yokoi. For example, that he has been a politician, that he worked with a certain Japanese politician, Goto Shinpai, that he had done something with prisoners, no, that he was a reporter of a magazine, and all those things that were not yet named in the narrative by Takata about Usui now suddenly also were named. And but again, they could not be found in the life of Mikao Usui. And that is already strange because Mikao Usui is of the generation of my grandparents, or perhaps my great grandparents, but not. We are not speaking talking about ancient history of Caesar or Brutus. It is not that long ago, and still there is nothing known about this Mikao Usui, and that already puzzled me in 1994. This doesn't make sense that there's so little information on him. So I started with the life of Tokio Yokoi, and it is a fascinating person. He was at the peak of his fame. He had name and fame throughout the entire Japanese empire, and so it was possible to find quite some information about him just because of this reason that he was so well known and famous. And yeah, you had to look, of course, but you can find a lot. And that is what I gathered. And I presented now in a book that came out half a year ago as an addition to Elizabeth's work, I could almost say. And it was limited to the person Yokoi and answering the question, did he acquire the necessary knowledge to spread Reiki? Does his life fit in a Reiki story? And my conclusion is it is. And for me, it's now clear that it was Tokyo Yokoi who acquired the knowledge and who must have been the founder of Reiki. And what I don't know at this moment for sure is how Mikao Usui got into the story. I have a theory, but that has to be proven, and that is an open question. But that is where I am now. And thanks to my research, I have learned more about Reiki practice, because by finding the sources of information he found, it gave me more information about Reiki. Oh, this is how things, this is why this is that or that. And now that makes it interesting. So this is the management summary, the back cover of the book.
Yeah, no, and it's funny because when I first heard it, I said, could actually Takata, when she wanted to westernize the story of Reiki and perhaps knew of Tokio Yokoi and took his storyline and sold it, like use it as a base for her story. But you're saying also Jikiten and other lineages that are Japanese traditional had some elements that also match. Because for me, my first is like, maybe Takata knew about this, and I say, oh, I'm just going to take history and put it there. But you're saying other lineages also have some elements, right?
Yeah, that is also for a lot of people. It is they are touched by the idea that that Takata didn't make up a story.
Yeah.
That most likely she told the truth as far as it was true for her. And I gave this presentation, this conversation that we have now also for Reiki Home. And there was also Rick Bockler present, one of the two remaining Takata masters. And he was touched to tears. He was
Oh,
touched to tears because he said, yeah, well, always when I give a Reiki class and the history, we talk about the history, it's, I always mumble a little bit and go on with the next element. And now I hear that her story seems to be have been correct. And he was delighted. And I was so glad to him. I said to him that I know him personally because he's married with my Reiki master. And that I was so glad that he could still, while being alive, hearing the story of Tokio Yokoi and that the kata didn't make it up.
wow.
And that so for those elder generation, this is an amazing story.
So could you tell us a little bit then in his story, in Tokyo Yokoi's story? Because what I read is he was a Christian reverend and he wanted, like, he liked this idea that you can lay hands on people and help the healing. And he really was attracted by aspect of Christianity. Also, like, I was reading that Confucianism had the ethics and the Buddhism had the spirituality. He wanted something integrated together. But when he started researching into Christianity, tell us a little bit what happened when he really like wasn't so much in agreement with this very magical Jesus, very more human. And that for me was very interesting as well, because I think when we think of a Japanese Christian, it's not a current European or Latin American Christian. It was a different approach to it, and I would love for you to go over it a little bit.
Okay, then we go back in time. We go back to the
We're traveling.
Meiji rest.
Ooh, yes, we're traveling back in time.
Yeah, go back in time. We go back in time in halfway 1800. It was the time that the Meiji emperor became emperor, and Japan had been closed for 2.5 centuries, and they decided there was a lot of pressure from foreign countries like the Americans, but also the Dutch, the English, the Portuguese, open your borders or else. And that was more or less a threatening situation. And the Japanese understood that they had no chance against all those advanced weaponry from Western countries. So they decided we have to open the border. And at that time, the Meiji emperor became the leading man. And the Meiji emperor, he guided the process from Japan into the Western world, so to speak, into modernity, you could better say. And the Meiji Emperor had 10 or 12 personal counselors who helped him gave him advice on all kinds of things. And one of those counselors was Yokoi Shonan. And this is the father of Tokio Yokoi. And so we are now in the highest level of society where we are sitting at the table of the Meiji Emperor. So at some point, Yokoi Shonan got assassinated. It was a political assassination because there were people who found him too Western. because there was a gigantic struggle in Japan going on for whether or not they should be closed and typical Japanese or open themselves for the modernity. And so not everybody appreciated this process. So the borders were got open. Yokoi was assassinated, but that's a detail because he's the father of Tokio Yokoi. And with all those modernity in science, in medicine, in politics, in whatever, also came Christianity. And there was already Christianity in Japan, but it was forbidden. And so there was always
1600s
had
were
been,
a mess. Yeah, with
yeah,
the
it was
yeah.
underground, so to speak, illegal. But it was there, but it didn't play really a role. But it did start to play a role when the borders were opened. At that point, missionaries from especially the United States, came into Japan and tried to save souls, so to speak. And they were interested in Christianity. And why were they interested in Christianity? Because first of all, they noticed that these European countries that circled around Japan, like the United States, Dutch, Portuguese, were all Christian countries. And they were more advanced in their development than Japan. So they thought, well, maybe Christianity has something to do with it. So they started to seriously taking a look at Christianity. And they saw that where they had a Confucianism for the ethical part of their life, and Buddhism and Shinto for the religious part of their life, it was separated. They saw that in Christianity it was combined into one. And that was for them interesting that it could be one instead of separate ways of thinking and living. So that was another reason why they were interested. And at some point, of course, they learned the Western way of Christianity, but we have, of course, a history of 2,000 years. And at some point, there were some people in Japan who said, "No, well, we listen to you, but there are some things happened in the development of Christianity in Europe that we don't understand and don't appreciate." And one of those things is that during the Nicaea Concilium of Nicaea in the year 325, that you said, well, Jesus is God himself. And after that, it became a Trinity with Father, Son, Holy Spirit. But we, with our philosophical way of thinking from Confucianism, we cannot come to that conclusion. So we let that go. And we think that Jesus was human, like you and me. And that was a very interesting statement, because then there were Japanese who said, yeah, but wait a minute, if Jesus was human and he could do all kinds of miracles, how did he do that? Can we do that also? That was, of course, interesting. And that is how people got interested in the healing, not alone the healing, but also other, like speaking in tongues and those kinds of things. The Pentecost, what we call the Pentecost in the West. What happened? How did Jesus reach this point of development, and how did he pass this onto his disciples and to other people? So basically they were interested in two processes: what happened to Jesus, and what did Jesus pass on, and how did he pass it on to other people? And they thought, well, maybe we can. What happened to Jesus? Maybe we can compare this with Confucius, because Confucius had a moment of direct enlightenment, and they thought, well, maybe Jesus is something like that. And the interesting thing is that the Chinese, some of Chinese Confucianists, there's always some, which is never always or everybody, it's always, there are Confucianists who say that Confucius received Lin, and this Lin was embedded in Qi. And so we have the Chinese word Ling Qi. And that came to Japan and was pronunciated as Reiki, our Reiki. And behold, suddenly we have a narrative where the kanji Reiki gets a place. Earlier was it associated with Confucius and his direct moment of enlightenment. Interesting. So for me, it's not a coincidence that in 1922, that man who came down from Mount Kurama said, I have found Reiki. No, I think he was inspired by Confucianism. But we are not yet in 1922. We are with Christianity. So they started to find out from, okay, what did Jesus do? Well, it was not only healing, but it was also speaking in voice, and it was also looking in the future. And people wanted all that. But there were also people who were solely interested in healing. And this, of course, this whole development, what I now share in a few minutes, took years, if not decades. And in these decades, Tokio Yokoi grew up. His father was assassinated when he was 11, when Tokio Yokoi was 11, and he went to a Christian school. And it was a very important Christian school because it was a school that was visited by the Meiji Emperor to see how it works. So now, well, the Meiji Emperor didn't visit any school in Japan just like that. It was very special, as you can imagine. Now it is special, but in those days it was super special. And at the age of 18, he um, he went for a retreat on a mountain, Mount Hanaoka, and he got a mystical experience. He was struck by the love of Jesus. And from that moment on, he knew this is what I want to find, this is what I want to reach. And for me, that is also the origin of the love in Reiki. Ask any Reiki practitioners and ask them what it's all about, and they will say it's love. It's love energy. And I think that with Tokio Yokoi, it started with the love of Jesus as a mystical experience. So he went on, he became baptized, he became a reverend, and and he um, and he became head of Doshisha. And before he became head of Doshisha, he traveled to the United States, just as Mr. Kata has done. Takata said that he went to Chicago for a study. And there Takata has mixed up two things. And it is that in 1983 there was a super important conference. It was the World Parliament of Religions. And it was the first time in human history that from all over the world people would gather and talk about their religions. And it was set up by Americans, by Christians, who thought, well, if we do this, it will be clear for everybody that Christianity is the most dominant and the best religion. Well, that went differently. But in Japan, they realized it was a very important meeting, and they took 6 months to decide who would be part of the Japanese delegation to represent Japan on this Congress. And one of them was Tokio Yokoi. And that is what I think the Kata remembered, that indeed he went to Chicago. Um, uh, and after this conference, 1893, he went on to Yale University, and that is where he studied. So I think that the Kata mixed up those two things, that he went to Chicago and studied. Yeah, he studied, but it was Yale University. That is what Elizabeth Layton found out. And he studied at the School of Divinity and what we would call theology nowadays. So and when he came back, he went to Doshisha and became teacher and ultimately head of Doshisha. And indeed, it was there that he had a discussion with his students about faith. And the Kata says it was about faith, about whether or not Yokoi could heal. That I couldn't find in literature, but that could be the case. But it was about faith, and he couldn't. Well, whatever it went, it was for Yokoi reason enough to resign. And what the Kata didn't tell is that not only Yokoi resigned, but within a week or so, the entire staff of Doshisha resigned, and that was a problem because it was financed by the American Board of Missionaries, and they had an influence on what was going on the Shisha. And because now the whole staff was gone, they lost their influence. So they were pissed off about this whole situation. And but that is what happened. And so next he became a civil servant at the Department of Foreign Affairs. And in this job, he traveled to India and later on even gave a lecture on Waseda University in Tokyo that was found recently, where he spoke about his trip to India. And he did this because Japan was wanted to build up a relationship with India for trade, for cotton and for tea and those kinds of things. And he was sent to India to find out how if it was possible. And it is not unthinkable that he also uh, took a look at the religions of India, because he was a religious scholar also. So it may have been that he already in 1903 experienced firsthand Hinduism and perhaps also Buddhism as it is practiced in India. So after that, he ended up in politics, and that is where he must have met. Uh, what was the name of this other Goto Shinpai? Because they were at the same time in the parliament of Japan. So that is where he must have known Goto Shinpai and may have worked for him, as Shikiden Reiki, for example, says. Then something happened that he got involved in a bribery with a sugar company, and he had to let go this position in parliament, and he was sentenced to 6 months of prison. And it seems that he there still evangelized inmates. And that is also part of the narrative what Yigen Reiki tells, that he did something with inmates in the prison. And what they didn't tell is that he himself was imprisoned, because that, but anyway, also that, so piece after piece falls into the life of Yokoi as
Yeah.
we continue. And even kijken, even kijken hoor, that is one step back. When they back in time. Sorry, you can do it. You can handle it.
We can come
When
back.
when these Japanese people were trying to find out how Jesus could perform, could could make it happen that other people could also heal by baptizing, they were looking in Shinto rituals like Kishin from Shingon Kishin and who knows Kachikito as examples for how to do such a ritual, what I think is the source of information, what for later became the Reiki initiation, because that is Japanese, that is not Christian. And so there's where the initiation already comes from, and the whole idea of healing. And later on, when he traveled around the world, he like this 1983 conference, that is where he also picked up knowledge about prana, but as life energy and as healing substance, and but also, to my opinion, to Sufism. And Sufism has a healing practice that looks very similar to Reiki. And that was already expressed by another scholar who noticed that there's a strong resemblance between Reiki and a book that was written by Ramacharaka in 1906, The Art of Psychic Healing. And he thought, hey, this is what it is all about Reiki. And what I found out after that is this is Ramacharaka, or his American name, William Walker Atkinson, was also inspired by Sufism. In fact, he wrote himself a book of Sufism. So all those elements of Reiki we can find back in the life of Tokio Yokoi. And then something important happened. The World War One breaks out, and he had set up a magazine, and he was also a reporter, and he was sent to England to cover World War One from London. And it is there that he must have met the person who brought Sufism in the West, Inayat Khan, and they dwelt in the same aristocrat social circles. And I found indeed one document where both names are mentioned. So I think that this is also a source of information for him. And then in 1919, there was, as you may know, the Paris peace talks, which was the ending of World War One. And at those days, Japan was on the Western Allied side, so to speak. And uh, in the Japanese delegation, we find again Tokio Yokoi. And one of the reasons is that he spoke fluent English, and but there again he was, and something interesting happened that must have affect his life. That is that Japan insisted that in this Versailles Treaty there would be a paragraph about equality of race, and it was blocked by the Western countries, especially Australia, because they had a very rude prime minister, cute, and he was sent to the Japanese for, oh, I don't understand your English, oh, so it didn't happen. And when this Japanese delegation came back, Japan as a country was offended till their bones, until their as deep as possible, because they felt that they were not regarded as equal as to the white race of those. We now speak of 1920 and not 2024. They were pissed off, so to speak. And from that moment, Tokio Yokoi disappears from the radar. And there's nothing to be found until his death of 1927. And this is interesting because the story of Usui, more or less, begins in that period of time, when when it is said that Usui went to a Zen monastery. And so I think that it was Tokio Yokoi who went to a Zen monastery, and because he had all the knowledge acquired necessary for Reiki, but there was one thing he needed. Uh, uh, he needed to, so to speak, to initiate himself. He needed this mystical experience to have a starting point for his initiations. He needed to attune himself to whatever it was, to be able to tune other people's on the same frequency. And it is my opinion that he was seeking again for this frequency of the love of Jesus, because that is where it all started. And in 19, what was it, when he, at the age of 18, um, it was given to him as a mystical experience, and now he was reaching out to mystery to experience it again. And then he comes down and from Mount Kurama, and that we have no indications from who or what or when. However, Mr. Kata says something interesting in her story. She says when Usui came down from the Mount Kurama, he disguised himself as a seller of vegetables on the marketplace. Nobody asked the question, did he also change his name? And now, in hindsight, we say, of course he changed his name, because he could never spread Reiki with his name Reverend Tokio Yokoi, and also become his name and fame throughout the entire empire as Reverend Tokio Yokoi. It was not possible. And another reason is that there was a caste system in Japan, and it was had officially ended with the Meiji Emperor, but in society it was still alive and practiced. And this means that there were 6 social classes, and they didn't mingle with each other. And Tokio Yokoi was of the highest caste, because Yokoi Shanon, his father, was a samurai, so he was also the son of a samurai. And the samurai class, you can compare it with the nobility in our society, with the highest rank. And so how to spread Reiki? Disguise as a vegetable seller, go to the marketplace, because everybody has to eat, everybody comes to the marketplace. In fact, there is a Buddhist teaching that says that if you have reached enlightenment, it says literally, go to the marketplace and help your fellow human beings to find their enlightenment. So he did exactly what the Buddhists had said that he should do. And he changed his name for a reason. Now he could reach everybody. And shortly after that, he established the Usui Kekai, the organization. And for me, it was always a question, how on earth is it possible that high-ranked naval officers like admirals and suddenly entered the Usui Gakai, because that would never have happened if he was indeed was a vegetable seller on the marketplace. And I think that they could go to the Usui Gakai because they knew him already as Tokio Yokoi, because they had spent 6 months with them in Paris with the Paris peace talks. They knew him. And they knew him at the time that he was a politician, because if you are a politician, you also know who is on the staff of the military. That, so for me that makes sense. Okay, oh yeah, they knew him. That's why it was acceptable for them to go to the Usui Gakai and practice Reiki. It was the same level of society, so to speak. And uh, he could also immediately start with giving Reiki, because he had already acquired all the knowledge. And it was just the visit, his meditation on Mount Kurama was not the start of everything, it was the end of everything. It was the closing piece that he needed for himself to acquire this capacity to perform initiation, to perform healing. That's my theory.
And Jojan,
So
being Mikao Usui, being Tokio Yokoi, I think what you're saying is very important, that experience of Mount Kurama was the culmination of a life of searching and practicing. And as you say, like maybe it's in Buddhism, maybe it's in Zen, maybe there's Confucian elements, but it's really he explored his whole life. He probably practiced, tried, and that's the culmination. I think that is very interesting beyond, you know, whoever, if he's two people, one person is Mikao, is Tokyo, like I think that is a beautiful thing to bring out as well. Like it was a culmination of a life of practice and search.
yeah, absolutely. And I think what in Christian mysticism is named the night in the desert.
Yeah.
In old Arab, they went into the desert for a spiritual, for a mystical experience. And in Japan, they go onto
Mountain.
up a mountain. It's exactly the same.
Yeah.
It's just that you step out of society and daily life to a silent place. And yeah, in Middle East it was a desert, and in Japan it was a mountain or a forest. It's the same. It's just another context, another. They don't have deserts in Japan. It's as simple as that. So that makes sense. And so he started practicing Reiki, sharing Reiki, and Mikao Usui dies in 1926, and Tokio Yokoi dies in 1927.
So that's the
Why?
question, because if it's the same guy who changed his name, why does he die 2 years after? Or do we know then are they two separate people?
For me, they're two separate people, because they know that there is a Mikao Usui who is born in Tanai, and that's also mentioned on the memorial stone, and that is, of course, that is now where it becomes tricky and difficult. So how is it possible that there's a memorial stone mentioning things that can be linked to Tokyo Yokoi? However, the name Mikao Usui is named, and some relatives of Mikao Usui, from how does he end up on this stone? That is difficult to say. My theory is that I think that because of geopolitical reasons, Yokoi became discredited by his own Usui Kakai. And what I shared earlier is that in 1920, Japan was on the side of Western nations fighting against Germany. And then we had this incident that there was no equality of race, which opened also the doors for the race theory that was developed by the Nazis, Nazi Germany, and also entered Japan, and found root in Japan, because they said, "Oh well, wait a minute. If there is a superior race, we are the superior race. If there is an equality of race, and there is a theory of race theory, then we are the superior race." So the sentiment changed 180 degrees, and in 1940, so it's only 20 years later,
Yeah.
the political wind has changed 180 degrees. And in 1940, they signed an alignment with Nazi Germany and fascist Italy. And the cards were turned around. And I think, that's my theory, that all those officers in the Usui Kakai, they had to follow this line, this political line. There was no choice. And I think that Yokoi as a person didn't go along in that line. I think it was against his development as a person, where it was about love and compassion from Christianity. And that for that reason he was cancelled, what we would now call cancelled. And what is then not uncommon to do in Japan? Silence the person that you have cancelled and just put another name on it. And I think that's where Mikao Usui comes in. And it wouldn't surprise me if Mikao Usui is labeled as founder even after his own death in 1926. Or before that, and maybe Mikao Usui was a student of Tokio Yokoi, and perhaps even an important student of Tokio Yokoi, who could take over his place. And something like that must have happened. And but left or right, in 1927, Yokoi dies, and Elizabeth had found all the transcriptions of the speeches that were given during his funeral, because there was a big funeral held for his memorial service in the central hall of Doshisha, and where even a telegram from the imperial family came with condolences for the family of Yokoi. Well, that is something. And so that was also mentioned. But one of the speakers told that at the end of his life, and that was an interesting phrase, Yokoi returned to his original faith. And this was Christianity. But in 1940, 1927, 1930, all this enthusiasm about Christianity that there was in the Meiji era already was turned around again in an anti-Christian sentiment. And if Yokoi, who always followed his own way, returned to Christianity, I
It's
think
out.
that was also a reason that there was a breach
Yeah.
between the Gakai and so I think there was a geopolitical reason, and I think that there was a religious reason, a philosophical reason.
And we have to
And
remember at that time also there is a lot of like these kind of Reiki-like associations and healing association. Like there is a lot of them. So this information also, can always, as you said, like maybe they studied together, maybe they created different association, but it's the same practice. Or maybe at the end, Mikao Usui did create Reiki and Tokio Yokoi created something else. And I think like it's beautiful that you brought all this information, because I have to say sometimes, and we discussed this before starting, there's some allegations that the tombstone may be fake or the Gakai didn't exist, but we do have some research that prove the Gakai did indeed exist. So what I appreciate is that you bring a lot of research to this. Like this guy could have been the creator of Reiki, and let's keep an open mind. And I really appreciate it. There is one thing that you and Dory mentioned, which I want to ask, because when we talk about Christianity, you say the element of compassion from
yeah,
Reiki comes from Christianity. And that's the one thing I'm like, hold on a second, because for me, Buddhism is compassion and wisdom. There is canon, the image of compassion in the culture. And then the Meiji Emperor, I was in a talk with Rika Saruhashi, and she's talking about how in his gyosei, his poetry, he shows compassion to the people, which is the first time an emperor is actually more human. And I was like, are we ascribing something to Christianity that already is in the culture? And that's the question I had, because that was for me like, woo, I'm actually become more compassionate since I'm more like into Japanese culture, right? So that was I want to hear your point of view, because I don't agree with that statement very much. And part of it was Rika Saruhashi's talk about Meiji being the first compassionate emperor and the empress as well. So tell me, why do you think the compassion is from Christianity and not from that change and that Buddhism and that Meiji shift as well, more about caring about people?
I think that a great difference between Christianity and Buddhism is that Jesus Christ died at the cross. He suffered. And Buddhism, that is not an element of Buddhism, because the
Thank
Buddha,
God. Thank
the
God. We don't
Buddha
want to die for people, and Reiki shouldn't be about dying or sacrificing.
no, that's true. But on the other hand, it opens the door to um, to show compassion for those who die, and that is something that was different from, I think, Japanese culture. Um, um, and that's what I think Christianity brings in. Just like the example of Caritas, the well-known thing of Christianity to take care for others with in that is a different taking care of than from Buddhism, I would say. And and I think that is where this compassion comes in a different way. Perhaps it's even the same word for two different things. That compassion in Christianity is experienced different than compassion from Buddhism. And I think that is maybe what also the Meiji Emperor understood, that he also learned from Christianity. From hey, there's a different kind of compassion for each other, and where it is becomes visible, according to me, it's in the life of Hayashi, as I wrote also in the book. You may remember that is that at the time that Hayashi was working in the Navy, and also after that was in the Navy, there was a fighting spirit, as it is called, and there were two ways if you go into battle: either you die heroically, or you find the victory heroically. And there is no space to get wounded. That's not in the handbook. You don't get wounded. That went even so far that there was nothing organized for wounded soldiers, sailors. No doctors, no field
Oh, wow.
hospital, no transport from the battlefield back to home. And if you came home wounded, you were dishonored because you didn't die or you didn't get a victory. And I think that Hayashi understood that you should take care of the wounded. And that is what Yokoi must have witnessed in London when he during World War One. Because there
When
were
he
many,
saw the
many,
veterans.
and all the veterans got a medal, were regarded as heroes, and there was totally different approach to those people than in Japan. And I think that Yokoi must have passed this notion on to Hayashi. And that when Hayashi introduced Reiki into the Navy, it was out of compassion for his fellow wounded sailors, that he could give them something in their hands to help each other. That is where the compassion
Okay.
becomes visible.
That makes a lot of sense because yes, doing martial arts, I can tell you, yeah, it will be, like either you die or dishonored, or you don't, yeah, or sometimes you'll retire from battle. But I think it's good when I appreciate that you clarify, because I think also when we just put compassion as a big saying, it's like, culturally, I was literally like, but there's canon, right? So that is a very interesting angle as well about these people suffering. And we also know the medical treatment in Japan wasn't like, in the 20s, they really were struggling. It was very expensive. It was very hard to access. So that part of like offering health and support for everyone is interesting that it comes from the West as well. What I love about this is, for me, like, I heard also Rika saying that perhaps they're not 125 Gyosei, right? Maybe they're 25. Someone is now saying also maybe the symbols come from the first president. I think it's a reminder that we have to keep an open mind, that we're doing research actively, and just we have to keep an open mind and keep practicing. What I love is the more we research, the more we see is also a mix of religion. There is not one, or a mix of cultures. And in a way, it's a little bit like New York, right? When we have these practices that englobe the best of every culture, it makes it richer, and it shows that we can be a global unit and take the best of us and create magic, create a beautiful practice. So I'm very excited. Again, it may be Mikao Usui, it may be Tokio Yokoi. As a podcaster, I will leave it to the researcher. I'm just, I appreciate how you communicate this so groundedly. And with all this interesting thing, be the creator Tokio Yokoi or not, he's an interesting character that is super interesting. And I really am going to put the link to your book so people can read about it, because now I'm fascinated with his life. I wish I had lived his life. Like, it sounds like one of the most interesting lives ever. And Jojan, thank you so much for clarifying even my question about compassion. Because I think when we hear things, we resist, and sometimes we're seeing from our perspective and not another perspective. And this is really a space where it's so lovely to talk about no right or wrong. It's just let's talk and clarify. So thank you so much. I encourage people to read, to bring an open heart, but also to practice. I'm gonna resume three things I really love, and I think also we have to be careful when we say he wanted to have a miracle and the Pentecostal spirit. Reiki is not just the attunement; it gives us the entrance in the practice. But as you say, it was a culmination about this huge practice and research he had, and years of like curiosity as well, bringing this curiosity. The fact that it's a very human practice. I love that. When I read like that about you, I'm like, okay, I'm in with this. Like, I'm dying to talk to Jojan, right? We don't want half human. We don't want to become gods as Reiki practitioner. We are human. It's a human practice. And then again, the compassion and keeping that mind open. So I really appreciate this. And that mix of cultures. It's not purely Japanese, it's not purely Western. It's literally a beautiful melting pot. So
It
thank you,
is.
Jojan. Anything I may have missed for, again, a lot of people, is the first time they may hear this. I will encourage them to reach out and read more, but anything that you want to add for these people who may be like, oh, wow, I've never heard about this. And now I'm like, I'm struggling with my feelings.
Yeah, yeah, I can imagine. It is. I think it will take years before this idea can get accepted. What I noticed is I had now only, I don't give many classes, but when I gave Reiki 1 class with one student, I told now for the first time the story of Yokoi and with the pseudonym Usui, and that is the reason why we find the name Usui all over the place. But the story of Yokoi was so much more interesting for this person that she wanted to know more. Oh, and how about it? And how about that? And it started to be, to live for her, and she could imagine, she understood that it was his quest, and that Reiki, she could understand why Reiki is what it is. And I have the same experience I heard the same experience from a colleague Reiki Master who also now had the nerve to tell this Yokoi story in a Reiki 1 class, and she had the same experience. It made sense. It fits in the Reiki 1 class much better.
I think, we'll probably keep on adjusting that history. And in my case, what I'm really focusing is like practice. Like the history gives you the background, understand the culture, understand the time, the historical times, right? Like Christianity in Japan was different. Like, as you say, the political changes, right? These people were born almost in feudalism, and then they went through rapid modernization. Practice Japanese art, so you understand like they don't do things like this. So what I love is this, where I have more understanding, but at the end, do your practice, trust your practice. This, at the end, you're still doing your breathing, you're still meditating with the symbols, you're still doing your hands-on healing. Like, have this enrich your practice, but keep on practicing, right? Some people are very disappointed that I won't practice Reiki. Well, the system works, right? This is just bringing richness to the background and understanding. So I really appreciate it. And I don't know, I have to revise my own history. I haven't figured out how to yet. For now, I'm keeping it very much about, the time of Japan. I really love explaining Japan at the time and Japanese culture, but also adding that Western element. I've been teaching for a while that is not fully Japanese, is not fully Western. So that is something I still feel is very much aligned after what you say. I will keep on, lately I've been saying, this is what we think it is, keep an open mind. I will insist. I will really tell my students and everybody, say like, just don't fixate and don't. So when I went to university, I'm gonna end with this. There was in Spanish a teacher, he was a divinity teacher. He said, the person who feels they own the whole truth is the first person who's wrong.
Yeah,
So like,
exactly.
so I think every time when I hear this thing, I'm like, it's a good reminder. We will never know or own the truth. If we think we do, and we're so attached to the truth, that we will probably be wrong. So Jordan, thank you so much for shaking my world. For again, I love when they shake the floor I'm standing on. It's like, ooh, it may what I believe was is not, and make my life richer. I'm dying to read the book, the whole book. I will put all your information as well as links to the interview we had where we talk about your journey. And thank you so much. Have a great, great, great end of the year. This interview is coming out very soon, so it will be in November, as we're talking now. And I hope next time we talk, we still will have more things. Perhaps in a year, you'll have even more information on this. So I'm looking forward to catch up, perhaps in a few months as well.
Okay, if you can appreciate it, if
I can. Thank you so much.